Okay, so here is what we're going to be doing in Unit 2. We are going to be working on understanding how to write technical descriptions, and particular mechanical descriptions, but we'll get to that. The key thing I need you to understand is that most of the time when we see any kind of object, we're just like, oh, it's this thing, right? I don't know, it's a book, it's a water bottle, it's a carabiner, right? It's a rolling pin. But when you're doing technical writing, you actually have to first make that familiar object or whatever or process seem unfamiliar, and then break it down into its components, and then mirror that back to your readers in a way that is clear and concise and accessible. All right, so that's what this is all about. And so this kind of gives the example of a telephone, right? So what is the purpose of a telephone? What does it do, right? But in addition to that, you also have to introduce the complexities, like all of the parts and subparts. Don't worry, I'm not asking you to pick a really complicated object here for assignment 2, but this is just to kind of, show you that if we're talking even about like an old-fashioned dial tone or rotary phone, that there are different parts and subparts that most people, non-technical audiences, would never even clock. A technical writer has to clock those differences, okay? So again, even if we're talking about something like a copying machine or whatever, right? When you're writing a technical description, you have to name the objects and identify them in a way that offers quick recognition and comprehension, and making sure that you include really clear names for the parts and subparts of the object, because you will have to identify the different parts and subparts of those objects, okay? It also means that you have to get really specific, way more specific than you thought you would ever need to be. You're kind of going to hate me a little bit, but it's technical writing, it's not me. So you're going to have to then really check out the details of the object, not only just its material, its color, its shape, its texture, its size, but also like measurements and stuff, right? So that's kind of important. If an object has a technical name, you have to figure out what it is. If the object doesn't have a technical name, you're going to have to make one for each part and subpart. So there's a lot of stuff, right? And so this gives you the example of the types of things, even if we're talking about a light bulb, right? So it's made of glass. Now, what kind of glass, right? You would actually have to look that up. Aluminum, and then, its color, the shape, the texture, all of these things, but even like the size and like the actual name of the base filament, right? So there are all sorts of things we don't think about, right? Of course, unless of course we're at Home Depot being like, how do I find a light for this ridiculous lamp upstairs, right? Then of course you think about those things, but that's the gist, right? You also have to describe the functions of each part and subpart. What does it do? What is its relationship to the other parts and subparts of that object, right? So for instance, the tungsten filament in a light bulb conducts electricity. So those types of things, all right? And the other thing that you want to do is make sure that you are revising the language to ensure that it's appropriate for your audience. In particular, that means making your audiences are always going to be, not always, but are often going to be comprised of both experts and non-experts. And as you can imagine, you want to tailor your language so that it is accessible to the person who has the least expertise, right? But you also want to make sure that you design a document and you include images in the document that in this technical description that make it easy to comprehend for anybody, right? So just really keep that in mind. So technical writing is basically asking you to practice patience. I think a lot of times if someone asks us a really obvious question, we're like, it's this thing, right? And then we're like, done. You cannot do that in technical writing. You have to be very meditative on the object it is that you're looking at, but you also have to be patient and extend that kind of generosity in your descriptions, right? And the care with which you put together documents. So it's going to be a practice. And I promise you, even if you pick a simple object for assignment 2, you might get thrown and being like, wow, I did not realize that I needed all of this information. But we'll talk about that in a second. But this is what this unit is going to be about, is learning this really foundational skill set. How do I describe something, like really look at it, really look at its parts and subparts, and really make sure that I understand the function and the purpose and the components and what they're made of and all of these types of things, how they fit together. That's like one of the key skills in technical writing. All right? Cool beans.